I would now like to invite our president to come onto the stage.
But can I first of all say a big thank you to Tim Brigstocke as our chairman for arranging this, the 30th National Equine Forum. And I hope that for you, like many others, and those of you who've been regular attenders, has been an equally absorbing day. And you've had that range of presentations, which always leaves you wanting to ask questions, but hopefully getting all the answers that you needed. And the Institute here has been a great home for us, and thank them for their hospitality. Now, those of you who've been here before recognise that I'm always tempted to go through the presentations and add a probably completely unnecessary comment. I think this year would be more appropriate just to highlight the 30 years, which Thomas really touched on there, of the historical perspective of what has happened in that time. And there are a couple of those issues, one of which was what has happened in the breeding world and what has become possible in the breeding world, which wouldn't have been really feasible 30 years ago because we just didn't have that knowledge. How people have responded to that and how they're making use of it and where that has made an impact. He's mentioned Suffolk Punches a lot. That's kind of where I've seen most of that interest go to and from. But also the anthelmintic resistance 30 years ago, was that as much of an issue, and did people recognise it? No. Have we learnt enough? I mean, the answer is it's still a subject of concern in a different sort of way than it was 30 years ago. But perhaps underlining that is, I think, the role that the National Equine Forum, since its origins, and since that first open seminar in the National Farmers Union, has contributed to that debate and all of those things in between. It's one of those issues, talk about medical sciences, and you get introduced to very specific subjects and people become more and more specialist and narrower. And doctors talk about the effect that they can have. And I sometimes have to remind them that there are people at the other end of this who actually don't care whether you... It's them they're worried about, not the bit that the doctor is interested in, which is going to make the difference. They want the whole person to be taken into consideration. And I think the National Equine Forum does that for equines. It recognises that it's not just one subject. It's not just one bit. It's not just one person or use of. It is the whole of the equine world and the way in which that has changed in its uses. Although 30 years ago, I don't think there were too many working horses left by then. I'm sorry to say I do remember horses working in Norfolk, and that was a lot longer ago. But the work point of that has changed, it's shifted, and yet for some of those they remain working in some capacity or another, but that work has changed. But the range of exercise, activity, use that the horse goes to has probably grown in that time. And the workhorses in the past did have very specific and important roles in transport, and it made life possible in many respects. But we've brought that on, we've changed that, and we've changed the ownership. More people, individuals, owning horses than perhaps they ever did before, because they were owned in greater numbers by fewer individuals. So that educational package that has to come with the horses, those who didn't grow up in that environment, with livestock of any shape, size or description, has challenged the way that we define equines and how we look after them. And again, I think that what this forum has done and what our founders saw was the need to draw together not just the professionals who were part of that scene at the time, but everybody who was interested in equines as partners, as friends, as grazers, as maybe sport, maybe as a professional career, but to bring all of those together to see why that was important to share the knowledge. Because although they may have very specific ways of looking after them and training them, they're still fundamentally the same animal and have the same issues. you go back to breeding and worms, they are a pretty common denominator across all species, irrespective of what you want to do with those animals. So I think it is an opportunity to say thank you to the founders. And I know when I first went, I think my role, I'd recently been master of the Worshipful Company of Farriers, and I was already past president of the FEI. So I went with quite a specific perspective of what the forum could offer. And also to represent people like Farriers, who I think even then I thought didn't have quite a high enough profile within the equine world. I was going to say there weren't any Farriers here today. Perhaps I'm still doing that, because they are a very important part of the process. Actually, the issue about the grass sickness and Highland ponies, they've also got some very interesting shoeing habits up there, but they didn't touch on that. And that was, again, a modern issue. But we're grateful that so much has been donated to the forum. Yes, the places we went to were extremely generous of their hospitality, whether that was at the Royal Veterinary College, at the Royal Society, or here at AMEC. And the people who gave their time in all their various formats. And I'm so grateful that both Graham Suggett and Miles Williamson Noble reminded us of those people who gave their time to be part of that exchange of knowledge over all those years, and how quickly people responded to that invite. And I hope that too reflects on the general interest across the equine industry and owners and breeders, that they do need to look outwards, they do need to share as much information as possible, and there's always something to learn. And there's always something you can add to your the way in which you treat your own animals and how much better you can get. Some of it is turning the clock back to understanding the things that perhaps, like nutrition and the things that you feed them, did actually have more of a benefit to them than we realise. And I think that's true in the livestock sector generally, that we thought we were being wildly efficient and giving them all the ingredients they needed, but misunderstood some of the things that we left out because they didn't appear to have any value. And actually, they probably do. So in this, our 30th birthday, it is an opportunity to say a very big thank you to those, our founders, those who contributed to making sure it exists, particularly, both then and now, because I realise that technology may have made things easier in some respects, but I think the demands and somehow the speed at which information is required doesn't necessarily make it any easier. But to bring so many people together that are still interested, who still find the subjects that we discuss are properly debated and give you the opportunity to ask the questions that you want to ask. Although if you're anything like me, you always go away with that one that you knew you should have asked and actually got distracted because of all the other interesting things that were going on and you forgot to ask it. I'm sure that will be relevant today as well. But it is, I hope, an important part of the equestrian sector in this country's ability to keep pace with the changes that are happening, whether those are really relevant to them and how they cope in the future. And today we've focused on one of the things that we don't always focus on, because I've talked about the horse, but the people who not only look after them, but are relevant to the whole of the equine industry and how they are involved in the industry in the future and what role they play and the access points for those individuals, and to make it as easy as possible for those who have an interest and enthusiasm to actually be able to work in, for, or around horses. Although I would say that there's something which is utterly consistent in horses, which doesn't define itself very well, is risk assessment. And I'm afraid it doesn't really matter how many rules you put in place. The risk remains the same. And that is true for all sectors. And somebody made the comment earlier that they had big brains. I wasn't not sure about that. But they do have a brain, and it is all theirs. and the logic therein is entirely of their own making. That is where the risk remains. And is that part of the fascination? Is that part of why people enjoy being with them, because they respond differently to different people in different environments? And you do strike up relationships. And we know that there are horses and ponies who only deal with certain people, and they just do strike up relationships. And that may be the thing that in the end it differs from almost everything else, is that relationship. And that's true of other forms of livestock and pets and that kind of thing, but I think horses remain quite unique in that respect. And as I say, in the range of work that they do for us. So I think this is a really an appropriate moment to thank those who are founders, those who went before, those who kept the forum going, who've very kindly taken a lot of time and effort to present to everybody, and for those who I think are regular supporters and listeners, and to our sponsors and those who've been hugely helpful over the years, including another 30th anniversary celebrator, which is the Mare and Foal Sanctuary. And again, I'm grateful that they have joined us this year. But we couldn't have reached this milestone without a huge level of support from some very good sponsors and the interests of a lot of people who wanted to make sure that this event happened. So I think I should be extremely grateful and aware that that interest is there in being more joined up, in being more able to present a proper argument, and that we've had perhaps better inputs from ministers. We are a higher level of appreciation in some sectors than we had 30 years ago as well. And that historical perspective is a useful one. So it perhaps isn't entirely appropriate that I can help introduce this Colin Spedding Award, because we do reflect on his extraordinary contribution to this forum, and in many other different ways, but his intellectual rigour, alongside his Chinese proverbs, made this an event that people could take really seriously, and they could depend on the information that they were getting. Now, the annual award, of course, is to a candidate, I remind you, of sufficient merit, so not every year necessarily, to an individual or an organisation that has made that exceptional contribution to the world of horses, ponies and donkeys. This year we were, in fact, spoiled for choice, with a strong field of nominations, and they had a very hard time splitting our two finalists, but you'll hear more about them shortly. You can, of course, I could just remind you, make a nomination for the 2023 Sir Colin Spedding Award via the Forum website. Nominations close on the 31st of July 2022, so anybody out there, please take that opportunity if you think that's appropriate. And we, of course, know that the winner will get a certificate of recognition to keep permanently, but also get a very smart bronze of a stag beetle, which I sincerely hope you are now better informed as to why you get the stag beetle. Please can we have it back? But also the finalist who doesn't win that award gets the certificate of recognition to keep. So I would like to now invite Dr. Pat Harris, as our Vice Chair of the Forum, to read out the citations, please, the Sir Colin Spedding Award.
Thank you. We're going to acknowledge our finalists before moving on to the presentation for the Sir Colin Spedding Award. Linda Worth is our finalist in recognition of the sheer scope of the access work she has undertaken on behalf of equestrians in Cambridgeshire and around the whole country. She has worked to include different recreational activities within the access network so that wherever possible, families can exercise together safely. Even when one wishes to walk their dog, one wishes to cycle, and another wishes to ride their horse or to carriage drive. Linda, please come to the stage to collect your certificate from our President, Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal. And now to our winner. The Sir Colin Spedding Award for 2022 is presented to Imran Acher in recognition of his dedication and tireless energy in breaking down barriers to provide access to horses and other animals through his youth work and St James's City Farm and Riding School for the community of Gloucester and further afield. Imran, please come to the stage to collect your certificate.
A most worthy winner. Congratulations, Imran. Really, really good. Thank you.